Tuesday, July 4th. So a happy 4th of July to our American friends on the Locked On Blue Jay podcast today. First segment, we're going to get you set for this three-game series in Chicago against the White Sox. Second segment, we're going to break down what the final week leading into the All-Star break looks like for all of the American League wildcard contenders, including, of course, your Toronto Blue Jays. And in that segment, we're going to take a look at what if the Blue Jays lay an egg on this road trip? Could a managerial change or at least some sort of coaching change be afoot during the All-Star break? And in the third and final segment, we'll deep dive tonight's pitching matchup as the Hound is on the mound taking on the skyscraper that is Lucas Giolito. So packed today that we've got to move Trivia Tuesday to tomorrow. Let's do this.
You are Locked On Blue Jays, your daily Toronto Blue Jays podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, friends. Craig Ballard, Locked On Blue Jays. Been locked on the Toronto Blue Jays my entire life. Big-time Blue Jay fan. I hope you would agree. A knowledgeable Blue Jay fan as well. I'm certainly somebody who wants to thank you for choosing to spend part of your day talking Toronto Blue Jay baseball with me. Do want to remind you that the Locked On Blue Jay podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And, of course, every Toronto Blue Jay game this season available for you to take in on SiriusXM. If you're taking this in on the Locked On Blue Jay podcast YouTube page, thank you. Hello to you, and thank you for that. Hit that like, leave that comment, hit that subscribe as well, please, and thank you. I see Jeff Brandon, a new subscriber. I want to shout you out and say thanks, Jeff, for hitting that subscribe. I want to thank R. Pratt as well. Made some great comments. Really enjoyed the inside scoops that we had last week from Tim Leeper, so thank you for that. If you're one of the everydayers making the Locked On Blue Jay podcast your first podcast listen, I absolutely thank you for that as well. Please hit that 5-star review. Jam-packed show today, so let's dive into it. First, we're going to get looking at this three-game series against the Chicago White Sox. Now, for the Toronto Blue Jays, the last time they won a series at Guaranteed Rate Field in Chicago, one of the worst named Guaranteed Rate Field is the name of the ballpark that the Chicago White Sox play in. Absolutely atrocious name for a ballpark, but okay, anywho. The last time the Blue Jays won a series in this ballpark was all the way back in 2018. The White Sox at home this season on a 13-8 run. The Blue Jays on the road have won 9 of their last 16 games. Now, the White Sox did take 2 out of 3 from the Blue Jays, a few months back in 2022 in this ballpark. You might remember that middle game. That middle game was absolute madness. Luis Robert Jr., who, by the way, this season is at 24 home runs. Only Shohei Ohtani in the American League has more. And you'll remember Luis Robert Jr. Remember, these two teams were together for a series at Rogers Center back in late April, and Robert Jr. had that sensational play right in front of me. I was at that game thanks to my tickets from Game Time. It was right in front of me where he robbed Matt Chapman. Remember, he climbed the fence? He hung in the air forever and robbed Matt Chapman of that home run. Yeah, that Luis Robert Jr., well, he would get a 2-out, 2-run single in the bottom of the ninth in that middle game. Again, last time the Blue Jays were in this ballpark, that tied the game. Roberts Jr. would also get a sac fly to tie the game in the bottom of the 11th, and then Chicago would win in the bottom of the 12th. Matt Gage allowed that tying run in the 11th and that winning run in the 12th. Now, I mean, fairness to Matt Gage, it was that free runner at second each time, right? And the Blue Jays didn't score with their free runner at second in the top of the 12th. So it's not like it was Matt Gage's fault, but just showing you that, a lot has changed. Matt Gage, not even with the Blue Jays at this point now. And the Blue Jays, of course, in that game, I mean, I say a lot has changed, but some things remain identical. In the 9th inning and on in that game last season at Chicago for the Blue Jays, they went 2 for 9 with runners in scoring position in the 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th inning. 2 for 9. So, yes, a lot has changed roster-wise, managerial-wise, things like that, yes, but the whole, complete inability to come up with the clutch hit late in the game, that was still that was still the Toronto Blue Jays there. Okay. Now, both of these teams come into this game as fourth-place teams, but completely different scenarios, right? The Toronto Blue Jays are sitting in fourth place, 11 and a half games back, while the White Sox sit in fourth place. They're just 6 games back. Like, holy moly. The White Sox are bottom tier offensively. I'm not super concerned about this series. I think the Jays should definitely get 2 out of 3 here, even with Chicago's improved play lately. Eloy Jimenez is a player I really like. I feel like he's got, masher upside for the Chicago White Sox. Well, and he's back from injury for them now, but he played in that April series against the Toronto Blue Jays, went 0 for 11, and the Blue Jays struck him out 5 times. So it very much seems like whatever the cure for what ails, however, the legit strategy for getting Eloy Jimenez out, the Blue Jays are onto it. Now, since if you take your mind's eye back to that sweep in late April, remember that first game was Chris Bassett on the mound. It's actually the same pitchers, Bassett, Barrios, and Kikuchi this time around as it was in that April series. And Bassett in that first game, do you remember at the top of the third, he gives up that 2-run double to Andrew Vaughn? That makes it 2-0 White Sox. There'd be 20 runs scored, 2-0. There'd be 20 runs scored the rest of the series after that hit. The Blue Jays would score all 20 of those runs. All 20 of those runs. The next 5 in that first game to win 5-2. Then they won 7-0. Then they won 8-0. It was complete domination from the Blue Jays on the mound and in the batter's box. You talk about in the batter's box. I mean, Bo had a 3-hit game in that series. Santiago Espinal had a 3-hit. Santiago Espinal's best game of the season was in that first Chicago series. Springer had a 3-hit game. Danny Jansen had a 3-hit game. And remember, 2 of Jansen's 3 hits, do you remember that game? Were home runs. And Danny Jansen, by the way, caught back-to-back shutouts in that series. I mean, is that good? Wow, wow, wow. Now, wow, that sweep would put the Blue Jays at 16-9. It would drop the White Sox to 7-18. Now, watch what has happened since then. So the White Sox 7-18. Then they go play a series against the Tampa Bay Rays. They lose the first 3. They'd win that 4th and final game, but losing the next 3 to Tampa after the Blue Jays just swept them. So the White Sox are sitting there at 7-21. They're 30-28 since. They're 2 games over 500 since. Same time span. Blue Jays 29-31. So same time span. Blue Jays 2 games under 500. And at the time the Blue Jays swept back in the Shy Sox back in late April, that put the Blue Jays in 3rd place. They were 4 back of Tampa. They were a half game back of Baltimore for 2nd spot. They're now 11 games back of Tampa, and the Orioles are 5.5 games clear of the Blue Jays at this point. And since that sweep against the White Sox at the end of April, the very injured New York Yankees have caught and passed the Toronto Blue Jays. So my goodness, what has happened to the Blue Jays in these last couple months here? Wow. The White Sox are going to see a few very different hitters than what they saw in that series. For one thing, Vlad was hitting 333 at that time. He's lost 60 points. He's at 274 now. Chapman was hitting 364 at that time. It was April, right? So we know who Chapman was in April. He was a video game. Well, he's now down to 262. So since the Chicago White Sox last saw Matt Chapman, he's lost over 100 points off of his batting average. Now, there is some other side of the coin here. How about George Springer? Springer was scuffling in that Chicago series. When the White Sox saw him, they did not see the George Springer we have right now, the ascending George Springer. Springer was hitting 216 at the time in that Chicago series back in late April. He's up to 270. He's up to 270. Dalton Varsho was hitting under 200 in that series. He's up to 224. If I remember correctly, Danny Jansen was under 200 in that series as well, and we know that he's come on lately with the bat. Now, one real good litmus test this series is going to provide is Vladdy really back? He had a very good homestand, but you could look at that and say, well, you know what? He was due to put up some numbers at home, so hard to say that he's really, all the way back. I'll need to see a lot more. Well, in his 10 games at guaranteed right field, he's only ever hit 2 home runs. He's not hit well in this ballpark. So if Vlad can put together a good series at the plate, I think it is going to be an indication that Vlad is back, and we can really look forward to Vlad being Vlad in the second half of this season. Bo, I mean, let's predict that Bo is going to be Bo in this series, right? We know what a hit machine Bo is. In 6 games in this ballpark, he has 9 hits. I mean, Bo being Bo, right? Interesting. Brandon Belt has played 1,367 career games, just 5 of them versus the Chicago White Sox. And this will be his first ever trip to guaranteed rate. He's never played in this ballpark before. In that series in late April, Belt was 2 for 7 with a walk, and he did hit game 2 pitcher. It's Lance Lynn. He hit Lance Lynn, who's starting on Wednesday, starting tomorrow night for the White Sox. He hit him very well, so something to get excited about and keep an eye on. As I mentioned, the pitching for the Blue Jays, the exact same. It's Chris Bassett, then Jose Barrios, then Yusei Kikuchi. Bassett versus Lucas Giolito tonight. Now, Bassett went into the 7th in that 5-2 game 1 win, pitched very well. Lucas Giolito, I mean, I mentioned how well Danny Jansen's done lately and how well he did in that Chicago series, including catching back-to-back shutouts. So certainly need to see a lot of Danny Jansen in the series. Not tonight. Not in the first game. It's got to be Alejandro Kirk. Alejandro Kirk, 4 for 9 versus Lucas Giolito. 3 of those 4 hits left the ballpark. Alejandro Kirk only has 26 home runs career. 3 against Lucas Giolito. Jose Barrios versus Lance Lynn tomorrow night. Barrios, man, was he masterful in that game against Chicago back at late April. 7 innings pitched, no runs, 4 hits, just 1 walk, and a season-high 9 strikeouts. Lance Lynn gave up a home run to Biggio, so let's look for Biggio tomorrow. And Lynn's just been getting rocked so far this season. And then Yusei Kikuchi versus Dylan Cease in the finale. Kikuchi versus Chicago a couple months back, 5 2/3 innings pitched, no runs, 4 hits, just 1 walk, 8 strikeouts. Very similar domination to what we saw Barrios against this White Sox team against Dylan Cease. Now, Dylan Cease, well, he's the Chicago White Sox version of Alek Manoah. Alek Manoah last season finished 3rd in Cy Young voting. In 2023, has been completely unrecognizable. We know this. We've lived this. Well, Dylan Cease last season finished 2nd. He actually finished ahead of Alek Manoah in Cy Young voting, and his ERA has doubled this season. He has been unrecognizable this season. I'll tell you, I truly have something talking to me in the back of my head that says the White Sox are going to take 2 out of 3 here. I really think that's probably just some pessimism setting in for how atrocious that homestand, just how bad the play, certainly how inconsistent the play has been for the Toronto Blue Jays. That's probably what's creeping in here because, my goodness, you agree or disagree here. This has got to be 2 out of 3 for the Blue Jays in this series, right? Coming up on the Locked On Blue Jay podcast, a look from a hot seat standpoint for the managers and the coaches of this Toronto Blue Jay team as to why I think that this road trip could well be a very important road trip for all concerned. Now, first, I wanted to mention that you can take your first swing at betting MLB on FanDuel and get 10 times your first bet in bonus bets, up to $200. That's right. You bet just $20 and you'll land $200 in bonus bets, whether you win or lose. That's $200 you can spend on everything from money line to over-unders, point spreads, who you think is going to hit a home run. You name it. And it's all on an app that is safe, secure, and easy to use. Plus, when you win, you get paid instantly. There's no better place to bet on MLB than FanDuel. It is America's #1 sportsbook. So sign up today and visit FanDuel.com/locked-on to get up to $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com/locked-on. FanDuel, official partner of Major League Baseball. Now, what does the last week leading into the All-Star break look like for all the American League wildcard contenders, including the Toronto Blue Jays? And could a poor road trip lead to changes over the All-Star break to the Blue Jays brass? Let's get into it. The Baltimore Orioles, and everydayers will know we've talked about the Orioles. I definitely saw the Baltimore Orioles coming as a major problem, as a sustainable problem too. The Orioles are coming, and they are going to be good for years to come. I hate to say it. I'm like you. I prefer the days when the Orioles were the bottom feeders in the division, right? But they are very real. As I said, saw this coming from Baltimore. Didn't see it coming as soon as 2023, though. I thought 2024 and going forward, the Baltimore Orioles were going to be a real problem for the Toronto Blue Jays, for the American League East. I just don't like their starting pitching this season, but look at what the record has been. The Orioles have been extremely legit in the first half of 2023, no doubt about that. They played the Yankees last night. They've got 3 more at Yankee Stadium. Then they go to Minnesota for 3 games. So the Baltimore Orioles, yes, there I am praising them. Truth be told, a bit of a scuffle, right? They've lost 3 of their last 4 series, and they've all 7 games leading up to the All-Star break this entire week are all on the road, all against playoff teams, right? Yankees and the Twins. I know the Blue Jays went into Minnesota, didn't have a problem, but hopefully Baltimore will go into Minnesota and have a problem. And as far as Baltimore playing the Yankees, what are we hoping for? Probably a split there, right? And then the Blue Jays do well and can pick up ground on both teams. That would be nice. That would be fantastic. So the Yankees have that 4-gamer against Baltimore. And then on the weekend, the Yankees head into the All-Star break by hosting the Stroh Show, the Chicago Cubs, and Marcus Stroman. That will be epic. Hopefully the Cubs get at least one, right? Come on, Cubs. Go in there and win that series, please, and thank you. The Boston Red Sox, boggles my mind. It's a pretty good reason for the bald head here, pulling out my darn hair. All of a sudden, we have to worry about the Boston Red Sox, and that's on the strength of the Red Sox being 7-0 against the Toronto Blue Jays in 2023. Make it make sense. Remember now, Blue Jays came into this season having won 20 of the previous 24 games. Blue Jays were on a 20-4 run coming into the season against the Boston Red Sox. And in 2023, it's been UGLY. It ain't got no alibi. It's been ugly. Complete domination from the Red Sox, and I absolutely hate it. So all of a sudden, even though they're a last place team, we need to pay attention to what they're doing as well. They've got all their games at home, a 4-gamer here against Texas. Played 1 last night, 3 more against Texas, and then Oakland in town for the weekend. So Oakland, please, you need you to find a way to get at least 1 game this weekend. And Texas needs you to do your thing, take at least 2, hopefully 3 out of this 4 of this 7-game homestand for the Red Sox heading into the All-Star break, I have to hope that 4-3 is their best case scenario. 3-4 would be fantastic. The Houston Astros, boy, here's a team I just don't think the Blue Jays are going to catch. And in particular, not going into the All-Star break, is the Astros tonight and tomorrow night. They host the last place in all of the National League, Colorado Rockies. They're not just last place in their division, they're the worst team in the league. Then they host the Mariners for 4, while Mariners are second last place. Now, probably going to be some desperation for the Mariners because they really need to do something to boost themselves, to get themselves in a playoff run position. So hopefully that'll be a spirited Mariners team against Houston. But wow, it looks like Houston's looking at the last 6 games to the All-Star break. It looks like they're looking at an easy 4-2 finish, if not better. So definitely concerned about the Houston Astros. The Angels are on the road all week. They're playing at San Diego and then at the Dodgers. Now, then the Blue Jays, we deep dived earlier how the Blue Jays have start this road trip, this very important road trip to get into the All-Star break in Chicago. Then the last 3 games, the weekend games at Detroit. Well, the last 3 times the Blue Jays have been to Detroit, they've taken 2 out of 3 games. So I really think the Jays look good for a 4-2 road trip here. That would put them on an 87 win pace. Now, there's no possible way that that's something we saw coming, that we're excited about. That's to their potential, right? There's all kinds of issues with an 87 win pace. For a lot of teams, that's a fantastic pace. For the 2023 Toronto Blue Jays, oh boy, that's going to be stunning. They made so many, at least on paper, I thought, improvements, and then that would be what 6 games worse than last season. I just, man, now that 87 win pace. Every dayers will know that we've deep dived this schedule, right? Well, 40 of the 71 games after the All-Star break are at home. That includes 13 out of the first 19 games out of the All-Star break and 16 of the last 22 games of the season, all at home. So the schedule opens up for the Blue Jays. That 87 win pace could really skyrocket just from a schedule standpoint in the second half of this season. So yes, I do think this is an important road trip for the Toronto Blue Jays because even 4-2, on paper, not going to look great, but when you look at the second half of the season, it could be enough to propel the Blue Jays to make a run in the second half. If the Blue Jays go, 3-3 or 2-4 on this road trip and are more like an 84-85 win pace, wow, I just don't know if that's going to be enough to save jobs. We'll look at that in a minute here. And I certainly don't know if that's going to be enough to set up the Blue Jays to make a run for a playoff spot in the second half of this season. Now, again, the schedule opens up, so the Blue Jays just need to finish getting to the charge to the All-Star break, not a limp like it's been. They need to get a charge going to the All-Star break, get that 87 win pace because it can open up in the second half. There's 6 divisions in baseball. The Blue Jays will play 27 games after the All-Star break against the second last place team or the last place team, and they'll play the Cubs in mid-August. And if St. Louis has caught the Cubs by then, I think St. Louis is currently 3 games back of the Cubs for last place. If St. Louis does catch and pass the Cubs and the Cubs become a last place team, then literally in the second half of the season, the Blue Jays will play all 6 divisions last place teams. What about if the Blue Jays were to lose 2-3 to the White Sox? Here's where things get interesting for me. I mean, what if I'm wrong about this road trip? It's not a 4-2 road trip, so it's not a good finish as we head into the All-Star break and look forward to that schedule opening up in the second half of the season. What if they have a poor road trip? If they were to lose 2-3 to the Chicago White Sox, that would put them at 46-42. That's the same record. That's the same record where the Blue Jays fired Charlie Montoyo last season, and they fired him with that record on the back of a really bad road trip, really uninspired play, right? Well, is that what we're about to see on this road trip here? Let's see. And now this is the last season of the Blue Jays paying Charlie Montoyo. It's the first year of them paying John Schneider. So if the Blue Jays do make a move, and honestly, I'm going to be stunned if the Blue Jays make a move on John Schneider over the All-Star break. But my point here is this road trip's important. What if the Blue Jays fall flat on their face on this road trip? What if the Blue Jays fall flat on their face on this road trip and head into the All-Star break at best in 4th place? It's possible the Blue Jays head into the All-Star break in dead last. Wouldn't the Blue Jays, I mean, we could see that could be enough, right, to pull a trigger on a John Schneider. Now, at that point, that would mean that you're paying Montoyo, Schneider, and the new manager for the rest of 2023, and then the new manager plus Schneider for 2024 and 2025, unless you're just going to slide over Don Mattingly. Now we haven't increased any sort of payroll at all. Give Don Mattingly a chance at the helm. What was he, the 2020, I believe, manager of the year? Now, he wasn't the be-all and end-all as a manager. I get it. But I'm at the point where I don't mind giving him a chance. And the only extra, a salary that you would incur is maybe Mattingly wants to bring in his own bench coach. Think of the salary you'd pay for Mattingly's own personal bench coach from now to the end of the season. And if that's what it's going to take to turn this 2023 season around to where the Blue Jays are playing to their potential, my gosh, I think we're all in on that scenario. Like if the Blue Jays have a good road trip here, I don't think any of this happens here. If the Blue Jays have a good road trip, I don't even think that the firing of Guillermo Hernandez happens here. And let's take a look at that in a second here. But I'm saying this here. It's not just a similarity in the records. It's the fact that the Blue Jays are so far below their expectations. Again, could literally head to the All-Star break in last place. But I really feel like there's a sense of urgency for the 2023 Toronto Blue Jays. So fourth or fifth place heading into the All-Star break, that might be where the Blue Jays are looking to pull, where Shapiro and Atkins are looking to pull the trigger on something. And I say urgency because this is your last season with Whit Merrifield. This is your last season with Matt Chapman. This is very likely your one and only season with Brandon Belt. This is very possibly your one and only season with Kevin Kiermaier. And again, depending on the results of this road trip, I mean, it could be a third place team. That'd be great. Then I don't think any changes are happening, obviously. But if it's a fourth or fifth place team coming out of this road trip, my goodness, the Yankees and the Astros with injury issues, they haven't been nearly as good as they were projected to be. Only Tampa Bay has been really as good as I expected them to be. So for the Toronto Blue Jays, do you think that if you make a move, can you improve your team just enough to be real contenders in the American League East? Because let's say the Yankees were healthy playing to their potential, Houston was healthy playing to their potential, then there's those two teams plus Tampa that you have to find and catch. So will you be doing all this acrobatic work to try to bring in a new manager, and how do the finances work in that just to try to be the fourth best team in the American League? Well, but the American League is looking a little bit more open than I think any of us perhaps thought it might be as we head towards the All-Star break. Now, I mentioned Guillermo Martinez. Would not surprise me at all. Even a 3-3 road trip. I mean, even a 3-3 road trip. Yeah, imagine those three losses were two of those three losses were shut out. Like, imagine the offense just continues to lay egg after egg after egg. In particular, with runners in scoring position, then I could definitely see the Blue Jays making a move on Guillermo Martinez over the All-Star break. So I think this is a huge, huge road trip for this managerial staff, for this coaching staff. I mean, Blue Jays are getting hits. We see it every single day. They're getting hits. I attribute that to their individual talent. I'm not giving the hitting coach credit for that, especially when I see how poor the approaches and the executions are by the Blue Jay hitters with runners in scoring position. Not scoring a lot of runs at all, despite all the hits. One of the worst teams in baseball for leaving runners on base. One of the worst teams in baseball for leaving runners in scoring position. Who have we seen Guillermo Martinez develop? That's my question. The last 5 seasons, the Blue Jays have been a top 8 home run hitting team. They've been top 8 for the last 5 seasons. This season, they've been floating between 17th and 19th. So not even middle of the pack, lower than middle of the pack. The last time the Blue Jays did not hit at least 200 home runs as a team was 2014. Well, they're on pace for 181 this season. Not all of that is on Guillermo Martinez, right? I'm going to say that right now because some roster changes, we're going to see some steps backwards to the team offense. So I kind of get that. But what about individually? Slim Daddy Vladdy is still here. Matt Chapman is still here. George Springer still. Dalton Varsho still here. These guys are all on pace to hit home runs in the low 20s this season. That's not acceptable for any of those 4 guys. Any of those 4 guys. Even Varsho hit 27 last season. I think he's on pace for like 21, 22 this season. Who has Guillermo Martinez developed? George Springer has 27 more at-bats this season. He has 27 more at-bats right now than he had in all of 2021, yet he has 10 fewer home runs than he had in all of 2021. Vlad had 48 dingers in 2021. He's had 44 since. Dalton Varsho came to the Blue Jays. He was getting a home run every 19 and a half at-bats. That's now a home run every 25 at-bats. Who has Guillermo Martinez developed? We could have pointed to Kevin Kiermaier as somebody that Guillermo Martinez has helped. Well, Kiermaier has fallen off a cliff. His last 5 weeks, Kevin Kiermaier is hitting 153. Ultimately, Can I downright predict that there are changes coming at the All-Star break for the Toronto Blue Jays? I truly cannot, especially because if you and I are deep diving the wins available and the get back on track available from a schedule standpoint in the second half, then of course, Sora, Shapiro, and Atkins. I'm just saying the whole point of this segment was, could something drastic happen on this road trip? A 3-3, a 2-4, where the offense continues to play poorly, where there's not a lot of effort, not a lot of spirit. These are the things that surprisingly got Charlie Montoyo fired last season. It's a different animal. It's a different animal with John Schneider here being in the first of 3 years. But it's worth mentioning the built-in replacement is right on the bench there with Don Mattingly. And certainly from a hitting coach standpoint, right, Guillermo Martinez. I think this is a big week for the Toronto Blue Jays overall. Certainly, yes, but I think this is a big week, a big road trip for this Toronto Blue Jay coaching staff and the manager. Third and final segment on Tuesday's version of the Locked On Blue Jay podcast. Reminder, Locked On Blue Jay podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And this game here, Chris Bassitt versus Lucas Giolito, of course, just like every Blue Jay game available for you to take in on SiriusXM. Chris Bassitt, the Hound on the mound, looking for his team-high 9th win of the season tonight. Struggled in June, but did finish with an excellent start his last time out. That was that 12-strikeout gem against the San Francisco Giants. Those 12 strikeouts, by the way, a new career high for the Hound on the mound. Now, even with that gem last time out, the last 7 starts, Bassitt has added over a run to his ERA. He has been scuffling. Even when he was on earlier this season, he was dominant at home. He struggled on the road pretty much all season. Had that gem at New York against the Mets. Remember when his child was being born? Remember that? That was obviously an epic game, epic experience for Bassitt there. He was outstanding there, but more often than not, he's been really hit hard on the road. His road ERA actually more than double what his ERA is in front of the home folks at the Rogers Center. He's had 6 career starts at Chicago, and there's some glass half full here because glass half empty, I beg your pardon, because it has not gone well. 1-3 record, 4.7 ERA, tons of hits, tons of walks. Now, one glass half full for Bassitt and the Blue Jays tonight is he's never allowed a home run in this ballpark, so hopefully that's going to continue tonight. Now, the Blue Jays have lost 4 of Bassitt's last 5 road starts. Again, that lone win, that gem against the New York Mets. So Bassitt scuffling a bit lately, in particular on the road, and we know the Blue Jays scuffling a bit lately. Now, there is some definite glass half full things here. First of all, this is a night game. Chris Bassitt has been sensational. Every day, as we'll know, we've talked about this before. We've talked about that routine that he has to get ready for night games. It is completely on point. He's been outstanding in night games. All 8 of his wins, he's 8-3 actually on the season in night games. His ERA is 2.37. 2.37. He's had 13 night starts. 13 night starts. That's a legitimate sample size at this point. 2.37 ERA. Opponents hitting 187 under the lights versus the Hound on the mound so far in 2023. Love, love, love. More glass half full. What do we know about Bassitt's struggles? Well, in particular, lefties are getting them. Righties are being dominated. Well, what lefties in the Chicago lineup to worry about? What lefties? Andrew Benintendi, yes. Benintendi 3 for 5 career against Bassitt, and lefties have dominated Bassitt. So that's definitely a matchup we'll have to keep an eye on. Now, Yasmani Grandal, who is one of the only other lefties that'll be in this lineup, he's 0 for 7 in his career against Chris Bassitt. So hopefully, even though that's a lefty, hopefully Bassitt can do well against Grandal. And the only other lefty I think we may see tonight is Gavin Sheets. This will be his first time opposing Bassitt. And the only Blue Jay who's faced Gavin Sheets, I believe, is Jose Barrios. So I'm sure Bassitt and Barrios will get together for a quick chat before the game on this one, get a sound strategy for dealing with Gavin Sheets. But we've seen teams just throwing as many lefties as they possibly can at Chris Bassitt. The Chicago White Sox roster, it's like the 2022 Toronto Blue Jays, right? Even if there was a game where you could really take advantage of a pitcher by stacking it with a bunch of lefties, what lefties? They're not on the roster. Well, Chicago White Sox this season pretty similar. So this should line up to be a good start tonight for Chris Bassitt. Fellow righty, a big fella, 6'6" fellow righty, Lucas Giolito on the mound for the White Sox. Complete opposite as far as the direction he's going when it comes to him versus Chris Bassitt. Bassitt, again, was awful in June, except that last start, he was sensational. Well, Giolito was sensational in June, but his last time out was a start against the LA Angels. He was hit hard. Now, Lucas Giolito, absolutely stellar at home. He's got a 2.36 ERA at Guaranteed Rate Field, and opponents hitting under 200 versus Giolito at home. Springer and Bo, the top of this lineup, got to be the catalyst in this game for the Toronto Blue Jays. Their combined on-base percentage, Springer and Bo, against Giolito in their career, 476. Wow. 476. Wow. They need to be the table setters. And then once they do that, we're going to need, I mean, that middle of the Jays lineup to be significantly better than they have been in their careers against Lucas Giolito. That's Matt Chapman, that's Vlad, that's Brandon Belt. They are combined just 5 for 24. That's a 208 batting average, and none of them has ever homered off of Lucas Giolito. So the top of the order I could see setting the table today. The middle has got to come through, and we'll see where Whit Merrifield is going to hit. He's John Schneider's had him all over the lineup, right? Top, bottom, middle, you name it. We'll see where Merrifield fits into tonight's lineup. He is 10 for 42, 6 walks and 10 strikeouts. Now, just 1 home run, just 3 strikeouts. So he's gotten on, with those 6 walks, he's gotten on base enough times. I think on base is about 350, 360 against Giolito, but not a lot of hits. Well, but Whit Merrifield, of course, with those 42 at-bats, plus the 6 walks, so 48 plate appearances. Actually, I think there's a few hit batsmen in there, so upwards of 50 plate appearances against Giolito. You can bet he'll be holding court before the game for the Blue Jays, letting especially the righties know what to expect from the big fella on the mound. Now, Alejandro Kirk, we were talking earlier, Danny Jansen did really well. He had a stellar series the last 2 times these 2 teams were together. But tonight, it's got to be Alejandro Kirk. He is 4 for 9 in his career against Giolito. 3 of those 4 hits were home runs. Remember, we were saying earlier, Kirk has 26 career home runs. 3 against Lucas Giolito. And the other side of the coin, by the way, Danny Jansen, 0 for 5 with 2 strikeouts against Giolito. So it's got to be Alejandro Kirk tonight. Maybe that's somebody the Blue Jays can stick in the middle of the lineup for some production tonight. I think as well, it's got to be Santiago Espinal tonight. Now, where do you find, room for Whit Merrifield in that scenario? But Espinal, he only played 1 game versus the White Sox back in that April series. It was his best game of the season. He was 3 for 4. Do you remember that game? Went out with an injury right at the end after he stole a base. He was 3 for 4 with a stolen base. And in his career against Giolito, he's 2 for 4 with a walk. So Santiago Espinal, it's not often where I'm sitting here advocating that he has to be in the lineup tonight. But I think Santiago Espinal has to be in the lineup tonight. Of course, remember that. Catch that game on Sirius XM. Keep it locked on the Locked On Podcast Network now as I thank you for spending your Tuesday talking some Toronto Blue Jay baseball with me. But of course, we have Sully hosting Locked On MLB trivia tomorrow, so make sure to tune in for that. Go Jays, go, and we'll talk tomorrow.